In the last 18 months, I've done a lot of Mac Miller bass lines and guitar lessons, and what struck me is the subtle complexity of his music. How the guitar and bass interplay to create interesting chords on Cinderella, or how the rhythm on My Favorite Part is unstable, but how that instability perfectly ties into Mac's vocal delivery. His songs tread a fine line when it comes to music composition, and if these kind of chord structures or rhythms were used by a less gifted musician, the songs would just fall apart. But I guess this understanding of complex music structure is explained by his very diverse influences. Among his favourite albums, he listed Wu-Tang Clan, Portishead, and the Beatles. The basslines today are from his final 3 albums, Divine Feminism, Swimming, and Circles, because as his style developed, he started incorporating more basslines into his music. And as you listen to the evolution in his sound over all his albums and mixtapes, how much his sound developed in such a short period of time is a true reflection of his genius. Let me know in the comments if there are any basslines that I've missed, and if you do like today's video, please give it a like. The posthumous Mac Miller album Circles was released in January 2020. Following Mac's passing, producer John Bryan had been asked to complete the album by Mac's family. John Bryan is as a musically diverse producer that there is, and since the 1980s he's worked on albums by Kanye West, Beyonce, Elliott Smith, Bruce Springsteen, and Frank Ocean, as well as scoring films like Magnolia. So if there was anyone who could mould Mac's diverse skills, it was John Bryan. The Circles bassline is pretty basic, it's only a few chords. There was some great analysis by Spotify who pointed out that the album itself is a circle, with the final chord of the final song, Once a Day, resolving back to the first chord of Circles. Now when playing chords, it's important to make sure that each note of the chord sounds the same. So you don't want to be playing, for example, the G string louder, otherwise that note will kind of dominate the rest of the chord. So you really need to focus on playing each note the same volume. And to make sure that each note of the chord is clear, it's important to get the fingers really close to the frets. And to be able to get that good position, it's important to get the thumb in a good position. So I have my thumb around the 12th fret and about halfway down the back of the neck. Small Worlds was the first single off Mac's album Swimming. Originally, Mac intended to create a trilogy of albums: Swimming, which was focused on a blend of hip-hop and conventional songwriting, Circles, which was focused on singer-songwriting, and the final album in the trilogy was going to be focused on solid hip-hop. Now I'm going to get onto the bass line in a little bit, but one thing I find really interesting about the melody is how Mac is willing to take a chance. So a conventional songwriter would sing the melody as, "The world is so small till it ain't." So the note which I'm holding for a while there is an F, which is the root note of the chord. The world is so small. But what Mac does, he actually sings the flat 7 of the chord. The world is so small till it ain't. So that E flat. And by holding that flat 7 of the chord, it makes the kind of melody feel uncomfortable, really, because it's been held for so long. But when it resolves, finally, till it ain't, you actually get a stronger sense of resolution when you hit that next chord. And I think that's really cool. Actually, I know the Beatles did a lot of that, where they kind of would play a major chord and then play a 7th chord to add that kind of tension. But yeah, it's really cool how Mac is kind of doing that there. Yeah, really clever. Also, Mac's lyrics here are a standout. His brutal honesty in confronting his internal turmoil in his lyrics always made Mac loved and feel connected to by his fans. There's a very insightful lyric into his mindset about his fame. "You never told me being rich was so lonely. Nobody know me. Oh well, hard to complain from this 5-star hotel." With the bass line, there's a small difference between the first half of the bass line and the second half. So the first time around we go F, F, G. But the second time around we're going F, G. So that slight change in the bass line, as well as that dissonance in his vocal melody, are really cool little tricks just to make the song sound far more interesting than if it was just kind of kept the same every single time. album, The Divine Feminism, had a lot of higher profile collaborations with Kendrick Lamar, CeeLo Green, Anderson .Paak, and Ty Dolla $ign. Mac wrote this track about Ariana Grande, who was his girlfriend at the time, and she guests on another track, My Favorite Part, from the album. Now, one thing I found really interesting about this track is if you listen to the guitar riff, it just is the same thing over and over again. So like this. But when you add the bass, the track just takes on this new life where there's some really interesting chord changes implied by the combination of the guitar and the bass, like this. And I think that's cool. Some of the runs between the chords might be a bit challenging, especially this part here, as you'll need to jump a couple of strings. So make sure that you mute the strings effectively. So, for example, so I'm using my thumb there to make sure that there's no kind of extra noise that we don't want. And another thing, for those runs between the chords, it's important to make sure that you kind of get the right fingering. So for example, this one here, I'm playing this in 9th position, so my index finger is on the 9th fret, but for this one I've got my index finger on the 6th fret, which is the most, I guess, efficient way to play that and kind of the least awkward way. So you just kind of need to work out for each run where to kind of put your fingers, so it just kind of makes it the smoothest way to play it. Dang is such a fun track. Anderson .Paak, who Mac collaborated with on this song, had broken out in early 2016 following the release of Malibu, and his performance on the NPR Tiny Desk concert, which is still the most viewed performance of all time on that channel. Incidentally, the second most viewed performance of all time is the performance by Mac Miller. The track has great energy and it's just classic funk. The challenge here with such a funky bass line is to keep it tight and in the groove. There are some rests in between, like these ones here and here, so make sure to leave space between some of the notes. In the last bar of the bass line, there are some really cool fills on this track, but the one I've used are these octaves, which is such a classic funk fill. As I mentioned before, Ariana Grande guests on this track, and there is a lovely performance online with the two of them. The rhythm on this track is so interesting. If you listen to the hi-hats on the album, they're either going 1 and 2 and or t-t-t-t-t-t, which will be a standard hi-hat pattern, but instead it's a kind of a combination of the two, so you get this kind of drunken rhythm, and that's challenging enough as a listener. But then to complement them, there is this kind of also drunken rhythm on the bass, where we mix eighth notes and triplets, like here. So the rhythm on the notes, which have the 3 underneath them, like this one here, becomes pop, 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 dup. I think that's so cool and such an interesting way to approach a bass line. Mac's singing on this track is perfect. He's not the best singer in the world, but like his lyrics, his voice is genuine and it authentically represents him, and it fits just right in with the rest of the track. And the number one Mac Miller bass line is "What's the Use" from Swimming. Thundercat, who played the bass line on this track, was best friends with Mac. Thundercat flew into Washington from Europe the day of Mac's remarkable performance on the Tiny Desk concert because he knew how much it meant for Mac for Thundercat to play with him. On the anniversary of Mac's passing, Thundercat wrote about the performance on Twitter, but it was proof that I would have done anything for him. The biggest challenge on this bass line is playing the fast runs between the two strings, like this here. Like the bass line for Dang, you need to really make sure that you keep the bass line super tight and locked into that groove. And here we have these staccato notes, so the ones with the dots over them. And you need to make sure that you play those notes short. And to do that, you need to make sure you're muting the strings effectively. But adding those kind of staccato notes really makes a song kind of sound much more funky. And if you can manage to do all those things, your bass line will sound great. Now, if you want printable tabs or guitar pros from today's lesson, they're available on my Patreon, and a big thanks to all my patrons, especially my VIP patron. And here's some more videos that you might enjoy.